Welcome to the MEXpreneurs podcast, the podcast about the stories of Mexican tech startup founders who are building world-class, fast-growing companies and having a positive impact at a large scale. My name is Sergio Chavez. I'm a Mexican based in Germany, a tech startup founder, executive, and mentor, and your host. Today we have Humberto Martínez with us. Humberto is the co-founder and CEO of Nerit'e, an agricultural technology startup from Aachen, Germany, which was founded in 2022 and has raised 800,000 euros in private and public investment. He's originally from Querétaro, Mexico. He moved to Aachen in 2022 together with his brother to build Nerit'e after winning the first place in the Falling Walls competition in Mexico, completing a mentoring program at RWTH Aachen University in Germany, and securing their initial funding. I hope you enjoy. Support for this episode comes from Partnership Leaders, the leading community of partnership professionals and executives in SaaS and tech with over 1,500 members globally. If you're a tech startup founder, you know that partnerships are essential for the success of your business. PL is the place to connect with decision makers in strategic, tech, and channel partnerships at leading SaaS and tech companies globally like HubSpot, Salesforce, Google, AWS, as well as with new emerging players and with top thought leaders and service providers. PL is also a thought leader, creating incredible content on how you can leverage partnerships to take your tech startup to the next level. I'm a member of PL and co-host of the Germany chapter and have seen firsthand the richness and the value of PL. Visit partnershipleaders.com to learn more. Hi, Humberto. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sergio. Thank you for having me.
So, Humberto, please tell us, who is Humberto Martínez?
Humberto is an engineer from Querétaro, big foodie, and the elder of two sons. Both my parents are relatively boring, but I think they're very fun in their own way. My dad is an accountant. My mom is an industrial engineer, and they both turned entrepreneurs at some point in their lives. I grew up in Querétaro, even though I was born in Mexico City. So the question of whether or not I'm a Chilango is still up in the air, so to speak. Now I'm living in Germany, in Aachen, right by the border with the Netherlands, running my own agricultural technology startup. So that's, in a nutshell, who I am.
And what's driving you in general to take such a big step? What's your mission? What's your vision?
As you know, I went to college to become a mechatronics engineer. I absolutely love engineering in general. I was never particularly good at certain things. I think especially at theoretical math and stuff I was pretty good at. And I remember thinking there's so much technology out there, especially in the software side, and it's all at the service of certain industries. And it doesn't seem to be too concerned with the major ailments and problems that we're facing as a human species. What's driving me is how do we turn that around and take all the technology that we have, because there's incredible stuff out there that we can't even imagine. How do we take that and put it to the service of actual worldwide problems that everyone is facing, people every day need? That's my main motivation.
So it's about providing access to people to the benefits of technology. Is it a fair statement?
Right. So I'm not a huge fan of the word democratize because I think it's been overused in several contexts. But I do believe in giving access to as many people as possible. I think that, where is the most of the investment in technology going right now? AI mostly for advertising, self-driving cars, but it seems to be mostly because a few rich people want to do it. I think there's so much stuff that can be done still with technology that has been overlooked. I mean, in my particular case, farms in general, agriculture, it's sort of basically stayed the same way for a few hundred years, even though, yes, there have been, new developments every now and then, particularly from an oligopoly of agricultural machinery companies. I think we can do better.
And how exactly do you get to these realizations? So what's been your journey so far to get to this point? All the way, so you were mentioning that your parents were entrepreneurs themselves. You studied electrical engineering. What has all of that journey been like till today?
So I was born in Mexico City, moved to Querétaro when I was 6 months old. And I grew up there my entire life. Up until college, where I moved to Mexico City for the study of electronics engineering. And that's where I fell in love, particularly with robotics. I just liked wiring circuits and particularly programming and the math behind robotics. I just thought it was fascinating. So I started looking into that and what can actually be done. I did my bachelor thesis in self-driving cars, and then the pandemic hit. And I moved back to Querétaro for a few months or years. The pandemic lasted. Who's even counting anymore, right? And while I was back home, I realized there's one place that the coronavirus didn't hit, and that was agriculture fields. So I started going out as much as I could. A bunch of family friends had farms. I just grew up around them, so I knew what it was like. I just never actually took an interest into it because I thought, technology is so much cooler, and I wanted to go this way. But during the pandemic, I started going out because, like, in the field, it's just like so chill. There's no COVID. There's a lot of stuff to do, and that's where I started noticing, a few shortcomings that we still have, which any of my colleagues in mechatronics engineering could have done something about that, right? So I figured, you know what? Let's dive a little bit deeper. And that's where I fell in love with the problem of soil nutrients. I thought it was the hardest problem I could find at that time for agriculture in general as well, not just in Mexico, but this was a problem that everybody had. And I absolutely fell in love with it. So I figured, hey, there's got to be a better way to measure what the soil needs than waiting 7 to 10 business days for a sample to be processed in some lab, which already implies that you have to extract it in the first place. So that's how I came to this problem and how I realized that this could be huge.
If I understood correctly, so COVID was what ultimately took you to explore nature, to go into the farms, or were you already connected in some shape or form with agriculture?
Yeah, so I was already kind of connected to it because I grew up around it. Like a bunch of family farms had their own vineyards, for instance, or they grew asparagus or lettuce, tomatoes, and so on. So particularly that area around Querétaro is pretty strong in high value crops, right? I'm not sure if you've done La Ruta de Vino y el Queso in Querétaro, but
It's a must.
it is a must. Yeah, one of my family friends has actually a vineyard on that route. I did grow up around it, but again, I never really took an interest into it. And to be fair, before COVID, I had an entirely different trajectory planned out for me. What I did during college is I did a pretty cool business internship at Google. I mean, that's where you want to be, right? Like I remember, I mean, maybe we'll have to translate this for some of the listeners if they don't, if they're not actually Mexican. But I remember saying once, like, if you're going to be a Godin, definitely try to be a Godin at Google because that's that's probably the best way you can go, right? So I was like fully going in that direction because I loved it, and I thought, the work I was doing there was actually quite fulfilling. And then COVID hit, and then I couldn't do anything anyway. I even had an internship plan in some startup in Israel for an exchange before it was a major crisis. Yeah, and then suddenly I couldn't do any of that stuff.
So all of those plans got wiped out pretty much.
Basically, yeah. I mean, they got endlessly postponed. So I wouldn't say wiped out, but like most of the stuff in the pandemic just got postponed indefinitely, right? And to the point where it was actually, practically it was wiped out. But yeah, it was back at the time. I'm not sure how much you remember out of it. I think a lot of us kind of blocked that. But back in the day, it seemed like this would last, I don't know, a couple of weeks and then we would be back to normal. And we kept thinking that for years. For years, we were thinking, what was it? Was it Lopez Gatell who said, like, oh, next week we're going to face the peak of the pandemic? And he would say that every week.
Every week. So you went through these big change, started exploring nature, agriculture. But how exactly do you found these problem with the soils that you were mentioning? Was that something that you already had previous experience? You stumbled upon that? How exactly did that happen?
I absolutely stumbled upon it. No, I was not smart enough to come up with this stuff on my own. We started doing, so it was my brother and I, right? And we started doing some, soil sampling because like some of the farmers kind of needed it. And I was like, okay, might as well go take the samples, whatever. And it was a nuisance. So at some point we asked, like, why do you even do this, right? Like, I mean, you can look at the crops, right? And you know how they're doing. So do you really even need to know what's in the soil? And that's when we had to talk to a specialist, right? But what they explained to us is basically, yes, you do. And it's not enough to look at the crops because even back then I was toying with the idea of, hey, why not mount a camera on a drone? And then based on that, you can analyze crops, right? And if they're sick, then you do this or that, right? To make them better. And this horticulturist said, well, if you do that, it's actually already too late, right? Because it means the crop's already sick. Like even if you can see it on a color camera or infrared camera, that means there's already something wrong with it. And you want to avoid that in the first place anyway. That's when it hit, right? Okay, so what do you look at if it's not the crop? Well, it's the soil. And we started, going in that direction, trying to measure soil nutrients. And that's when we figured this lab thing is just exhausting. There's got to be a better way to measure and based on that adjust, especially fertilizer, because that's what will prevent the crop from getting sick in the first place. It's much like a human being. So if you get the right nutrients, the right food, then you're less likely to get sick.
And so you went through these realization. How exactly did that moment led you to moving to Germany, starting your own business? Because it seems to me that it was pretty much like a 180-degree change from the path that you were already into. So how exactly did that happen?
Absolutely. And it was absolutely not something that happened overnight, right? I remember, realizing that problem was there, and I was like, oh, that's like kind of a fun thing to look into during the pandemic. Just started reading as many research papers as I could about that. But what was interesting there is that when I was looking into this problem, I was still very much focused on this other career path that I just told you about. When I'm doing some research, I noticed like, hey, there's actually some stuff to do there. And I started remembering this little running gag that some of my friends would do, that sometimes when you work at a major advertising company, you're selling clicks, right? And they would use that as like a funny little gag. But some of them would say like, yeah, I don't want to say clicks my entire life. And I figured like, that's maybe they have a point there. I get the way that's funny, but maybe they have kind of a point there, right? And I remember there was this one time when one of the managers left for a different job. And I was like, you're not going to get free food in that new place you're moving to, right? And he was like, well, sometimes that's not the most important thing, right? Like sometimes it's more important to have some purpose in the job that you're doing. And if you don't find that in the current job you're at, even if you get free food, then you might as well go look for it somewhere else. So those words really stuck with me. And when I found this problem and like noticed how passionate I was about it, I realized maybe this is laying out a new path that I didn't see before, but could be very interesting. And then how it comes to Germany basically adds up to, we came up with this idea for a product, Rodrigo and I. It wasn't really a product, it was just like a prototype for, what could be used for nutrient detection. It was nowhere near technology readiness level. It was like barely even a concept. But we competed in a scientific word and won. To our surprise. And then that took us to the final in Germany. It was COVID back then, so we didn't fly there, but we did do like a virtual presentation / pitch of what the idea and development was. And we won again. So we were in the 10 winners on a global basis, and we were first place in Mexico. So that was really inspiring for us in saying, well, maybe there is something here. And as part of the winners, we had the chance to be coached by one of the 9 technical universities in Germany for a week's time on, just playing around with the idea of turning this into a startup. Our coach from RWTH Aachen really liked the idea, and he told us, what, guys, like, why not turning it into a startup and, try to make it into your own company? And after giving it some thought, it just seemed like the right thing to do. And we started working closely with the Aachen University, and they helped us apply for a few grants. After a couple of tries, we actually got one. It wasn't easy to get there, though. First try, definitely didn't get it. Then we found a couple other grants, and we said, oh, maybe this can help us, kind of like do some development in the meantime. And then finally got the, exist funding that we were actually applying for. And we thought this is probably the greatest indicator we're ever going to get. And if we want to turn this into a startup, we need to move to Germany because that's one of the requirements for the exist funding. So it's now or never. That's when I made the decision.
And prior to this move to Germany, you had some type of connection to Germany, or was that the very first time?
None at all. I had visited once with my parents, and I remember doing a couple of Duolingo courses because I thought back then, I thought the language was like a cooler version of English because like instead of saying fire, you say like foya and stuff, right? And I thought like that sounds really cool. Like I might as well learn some of it. I didn't learn anything, but I certainly gave it a shot. But that was basically my only connection to Germany. I had visited once. I thought the language sounded cool, and I remember I really liked, especially Bavaria. I had no previous relationship.
And your brother and you were the ones creating this concept, but you guys built an actual prototype. You just went with a pitch deck and presented in these different competitions. Like, how progressed were you guys when you won all of these and ultimately ended up moving into Germany?
Right. So I don't want to oversell we did do a prototype, but I don't want to oversell what the prototype actually did because we basically put a bunch of LEDs into a breadboard and then collected a bunch of soil samples, analyzed them in our back porch, and then analyze them both with the device and with a chemical procedure that we learned on YouTube. And then based on that, we created this database, which, we used to calibrate the model. And the results were actually not half bad. It was like 85% accuracy for nitrates detection, which we loved. But then we ran into more issues later on. But that was the very first sort of approximation for what the product could do. That took us a few months already. But to be fair, it was nowhere near what Nerit'e is now. But yeah, so based on that, we presented those results and that idea, and that's what garnered interest and support.
So you went through this competition, you had the opportunity to be coached by a mentor here in Germany. That mentor actually advised you to pursue building a startup. How common was that among the whole batch of other professionals like you that came to Germany? Were you the only one that sort of like was so advanced or had such a promising idea that they were actively recommending to build your startup in Germany? Or were there multiple of you guys from that batch who ended up staying here?
That's a good question. I think it really depended on the project, right? Because there are a few that are like coming up with this entirely new fundamental way of doing, say, an MRI. That's definitely several years off still and requires a lot of government funding or just general research funding, right? I know that's really strong in Germany. And some of them definitely, moved to Germany as well for especially research reasons. In Germany, you have some of the strongest research institutions you can have, you can find in the whole wide world. So like some of them certainly moved here more for the research that they were doing. Some of them were already living here who won the prize. And very few thought, hey, let's turn this into a company, move it to Germany. And even those who decided to turn it into a company, a lot of them stayed home or, moved it to the US, which fair enough. That's also a fair choice if you want to start a business. And some of them ended up in Germany. I will say that being here in Aachen, which is mostly a student town, it does feel like, like not fitting in that much because it's, like most people here are students, right? So, and I understand that. It does make it a great place to recruit. But yeah, it does feel a little bit like a different world for somebody who moved with that mindset.
And how was it? So you started this idea with your brother. Ultimately, both of you ended up moving to Germany, and you also have another co-founder. So how did you guys got together ultimately? Like, why didn't you guys continue the two of you together? What was the motivation to bring somebody else on board?
Yeah, totally. So that brings us actually to our mentor, right? And it was like, you guys, if you do get the support, you're going to have to do this in Germany. I mean, it's a great deal, but you will have to do it here, and you probably need somebody who can navigate that. Not only navigate it, but who is like driven to build something from scratch. And I remember that particular mentor said, and I think I know just the guy. Next thing you know, he introduced us to Tom. I remember I had a 30-minute conversation with him, and I figured, hey, like, I really like you. We might as well do this together. What do you think? And I told him you can take some time to think about it. And he was like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of taking some time to think about it. I'll just say yes right now. And ever since then, we started building these together. It was obviously very helpful as well to have a German in the team when we applied for German grants. During the first one, for some administrative reasons, he was not in the applications, like in the application's names, and we actually didn't get it. Next application, he was in there, and we also changed a few things, as far as the technology went, because the feedback from the institute was very clear. But we changed those two things, and then we were able to get the funding. So it did definitely make a difference. And I also believe that bringing somebody else on board, if you think they can be an addition to the team, which I will always believe that Tom was the right choice, it's always better to have a smaller piece of a bigger pie. So.
And do you also think that having your brother, the fact that both of you guys did this move also facilitated things, made things easier, made the transition smoother in general?
Yeah, so it's funny, founding something with someone you grew up with, because then you definitely need to set some boundaries. But I think Rodrigo and I have always been really good at that. And what I think was a very good call is when we moved here, we each looked for a separate apartment. Like, we're both in Vegas, right? But just not the same one. And I think that already goes a long way to being able to see each other at work every day and not have an outburst, because we still like being in each other's company because we don't see each other like 24/7, right? The same goes for Tom, to be honest, like, because we see each other as often as Rodrigo and I do, and we don't live together, and we wouldn't, because we know that it's worth having those spaces, right? For one space for work, one space for home, and then if you want to relax, just be able to plug it off.
So you both guys are now based in Germany. You're building your startup in Germany. I would assume that for the foreseeable future, you're seeing your future in Germany. But how are you specifically staying connected with Mexico? Is there still a bridge there? Are you guys doing some of your startup activities also in Mexico? How does that connection between Germany and Mexico works right now?
Absolutely. So we are running a pilot in Mexico to begin with. But secondly, I think the very fact that we're from there is already an unfair advantage for a startup. I'll explain. I remember visiting a business angel who also had launched a couple of startups in the AgTech space. He's a farmer near the Berlin area who manages, I don't know, like 10,000 hectares, something like that. And also a visionary, of course, right? And I remember him telling us for one of his companies, what he did for, commercial outreach? He would go to the supermarket, he would look at the label and find out what the company was doing and where they were, pick up the phone and try to find somebody who spoke English, German, whatever, to try to sell to them because they know that, farming in the global south is massive and very industrial. So that's the market that everyone is trying to get to. They usually have this first launch in Germany, Central Europe, because that works very well, and then expand to the global south. But they have no connections there. We do. We grew up there. So it's so much easier for us to tap back into that network and just start expanding internationally. We haven't tapped into it at its full potential yet because we're not there technology wise. But we know as soon as we do it, it's going to be 5-10 times faster than for any other company out there.
So having that Mexican-German combination has actually turned out to be a very advantageous situation for you guys.
It's so much so that we have brought other internationals into the team. Like we think the more international people we have in the team, the better it gets. It's just, first of all, it's more fun that way. And second, it does give you a lot of connections and context as to where you can expand later on. But yes, absolutely, I think that's been an advantage. So much so that, again, I would call it an unfair advantage because it's something that very few people have.
And is it primarily because of the nature of the business that you guys are doing? So the fact that it's an agricultural technology, the one that you're developing, or do you see other reasons why this is such an advantageous situation for you guys?
I think it's not industry specific at all. Like, of course, like agriculture is particularly strong in the global south. I mean, we know Mexico exports a crazy amount of, especially avocado, tomatoes, and so on. Maize, of course. But I think it goes for every industry. So take, for instance, Uber, right? Where did they want to expand right after stuff started working out in some of the US, all the major cities? You go to Mexico City, you go to Bogota, you go to Rio de Janeiro. Like these are the cities that technological adoption just goes faster. Why? Because people are fed up with, existing in a city with another 22 million people. Like it's just not doable. Right. So we just go for new technology very quickly because we really believe that it can turn our lives around for the better. And I think that goes for every industry, not just agriculture. But that means that, whenever there's a founder who starts a business internationally, which I completely get because it's just support is just larger internationally. Unfortunately, Mexico is getting there, but we're just not there yet. And then comes back to Mexico, Latin America, anywhere in the global south, really. But, I think Mexico specifically, you can turn it into a behemoth, right? Like if it works abroad, it's probably going to be a pretty good business, but it's going to stay relatively small. But for expansion reasons, Mexico and Latin America just offer an unparalleled opportunity.
It's incredible. Humberto, I'm very interested in your advice for other Mexicans that are aspiring to build a startup like you with such an international scale. Like, what would be your top advice for those that are interested on pursuing such a career path?
Absolutely fall in love with the problem first. I think that's kind of the most deflating stuff I could have heard back when I wanted to found something from scratch. But honestly, the way I see it is no one invests in solutions, but in problems, right? Like the solution is kind of part of it, right? But if there's a problem that you're convinced that you can solve, then you're not going to be stuck with a single piece of technology or like a single geography. You're not bound by anything because it's not solution specific, it's problem specific. And the more general that problem is, the easier it is to expand. So number one, fall in love with the problem. Number two is, you really need to find a support network that really believes in you. If that's, you want to make your project international, the best way to do that is if that network spans multiple countries, right? I think there's a lot of, for some reason, Mexicans, we're really good at, expanding internationally. We just know people, right? Or know people who know people. And I think the more we tap into those networks, the better we can harness the strength that we have around us to expand more and more. And number three, that's the easy part, right? Like come up with a solution for it. Like come up with something that's better than what's out there and which people can really resonate with. It has to make sense to you. If it doesn't, it won't make sense to others either. But the way I see it is if you do those three, and especially, tap into who you know abroad, which I insist most Mexicans know a lot of people abroad. It's just a matter of tapping into it, especially if it's other Mexicans. They will be more than willing to help. I'm one of them for sure. I think just following that is kind of a trajectory that will take you definitely very far. It doesn't have to be abroad. Like I understand why people want to do it abroad because there's just more support for a lot of these ideas, but it's also not necessarily a failure for something to stay there. It's just a different starting point. And I think that's also important to mention.
Fantastic. Humberto, I think we could stay here speaking a lot of other topics, but appreciate the time here being at the show and all the best moving forward. And of course, all the best for you and the team as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sergio. This is a great time. And let me know when this airs. Really excited for this new project that you have in your hands. And I think, the more people you bring in, the more exciting it will get. So keep me posted. And of course, we'll remember to follow you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Humberto.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thanks to you for joining us today. Please remember to subscribe via your favorite podcast app to be notified about new episodes and share with us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. Thank you also to the MEXpreneurs team, Valeria Morel, Héctor Barragán from Hypervoltage, Francisco Jaimes, Pamela Elizalde, Katia Cruz, Rocío Marroquín. I am Sergio Chavez. See you next time.